folks. Greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Security 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got myself, Brad, and Spencer here today. And today we're going to talk about email spoofing. It's not really a new thing necessarily, but the mechanisms by which that this is now being employed is interesting and definitely worthy of a discussion. And so before we get into that, some quick admin. If you like what we're doing here, just share the word, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And for those of you who are watching us on YouTube or anywhere else for that matter, I just want to brag about my new shirt. It says "World's Okayest Hacker," and so it's actually something that Spencer makes in his Etsy store. Ethical Threat. It's really cool. I had to pick one up, so I just wanted to give you a shout out for that. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. It looks way better on you because you have such bigger arms, and so it kind of fits nice, and you can see the letters real nice. So
yeah, I just have to stick my chest out,
It's awesome.
But yeah, man. So at a high level, tell me about email spoofing and why should I care?
Yeah, awesome. So the reason we're kind of talking about this again is because of this echo spoofing article that came out by Guardio. And they detail their research and kind of discovery into this massive phishing campaign that happened using more or less kind of a misconfiguration in Proofpoint's smart host technology, so their email relaying service. So spoofing at its most fundamental level, right, is just masquerading or tricking someone into thinking you are someone who you are not really. In most cases, when people talk about spoofing, it's usually with emails, but we can spoof phone calls, we can spoof a lot of different things. In this context, we're talking about email. So a spoofed email would be, you send an email to accounting purporting to be the CEO, and you put, you change the from address, and it's like, hey, the CEO of XYZ, and then you send that to somebody, and you kind of masquerade as that person or that user. So that's essentially what spoofing is. It's designed, it's a social engineering technique to convince a user or somebody into thinking you are somebody trusted or a third party or somebody that they've done business with before or engaged with before in order for you to carry out your nefarious deeds.
Sure. And, I can remember spoofing being a problem from almost the very beginning, right, of the internet. And computational things, but IP spoofing was a thing, and obviously email spoofing was even a larger problem before we started implementing all of these protections and things of that nature. And so, I think the techniques have evolved with the technology, and we'd like to think that we are progressively safer, because we make all of these fancy tools, and as we get better and better at being more secure, but they just change how they do things, right? And so that's what I think is fascinating about some of this stuff. So from a technique perspective, why can't I just spin up an SMTP server and send out an email that is from at securit360.com from anywhere?
Yeah, there's a couple things. There's SPF, there's DKIM, and then there's the exchange protections that are built in. There's the third-party products like Proofpoint and Mimecast and stuff like that have detections built in. But there are technologies in place now where if you change the from address to be somebody from that organization, and you try and send an email externally into that organization, a lot of those technologies are going to catch those. So that may or not work depending on the scenario that you're in, but SPF specifically and DKIM are two that are supposed to prevent spoofing or help mitigate it, right? So those are the two that I would look for, and we can obviously dig into those if you want, of kind of SPF, DKIM, some of those protections as we kind of dig into this echo spoofing phishing campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I would call it to reference, when we're having this conversation, is the white paper that Tyler from our team put together.
That's a good point. Yeah,
he put together a really good write-up on DMARC, right? And it's on offsec.blog if you guys want to check it out. But it's kind of a a Reader's Digest version of what all of these things are, right? And so, SPF, or Sender Policy Framework, was kind of, I think, the original anti-spoofing ish thing. And so, then came DKIM, and now we have DMARC. And so they kind of break down. Tyler kind of broke down all of the different components, and there are varying levels of implementation of all of these things. And so, SPF is really basically just designed to say that, hey, I allow server X, server Y to email on my behalf, right? And if it's not coming from me or them, you shouldn't trust it. It still a little bit relies on validation from the receiving party, right? Or whatever frameworks exist around that.
Yep. And another thing kind of in line with that protection is, back in the day, I guess, if you will, you could spin up a SMTP server and register a domain and send your spoofed email or your phishing email, so to speak, and that may work, right? Nowadays, a lot of these third-party vendors, especially Proofpoint, Mimecast, have reputation checking. So if you send an email from a domain that's newly registered, it's not going to let it through. Right. If it has poor reputation, if it's on a block list, there's a number of things that they check for. There's reputation checking now with those emails, in addition to SPF and DKIM, in addition to Exchange Online protection, which checks for malware and things like that. There are quite a bit of protections now for email-borne attacks.
Yeah, and usually that takes the form of some type of spam score. And so it's not just a singular element or attribute of an email that flags it. It's usually an accumulation of points. And so, like you said, if it's a brand new domain, it gets points. If it contains links, it gets points. If it's got attachments, it gets points. And so it just kind of builds. And then eventually, if that score reaches a threshold, it's marked as spam or phishing or whatever, and it's nuked. So.
I remember, so back in my sysadmin days, we had, I think it was a TrustWave product, maybe, for email filtering. And I remember writing my own custom rules and giving it a score of 5 or 10 or 15 and writing regex rules and doing my own custom rules for certain things.
Yep.
So I know the scoring it's very intimate to me on the scoring. I can probably rattle off some of the old rules that I used in the scores and stuff like that to rank certain things. And, so those were the days you kind of had to write a lot of the rules yourself that weren't built in.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that aspect of being in IT and cyber at the time, because it was before you had the fancy stuff that we had now, and so you had to understand things at a very technical and deep level before you implemented it. And so, like you said, I mean, it's pretty rare these days to get to that level on something like this. Everything's turnkey and it just works. And but yeah, no, I enjoyed getting down to that level. I remember writing Berkeley filter rules. And that probably ages me a little bit, but I still remember having to write those rules for IDS and things like that.
Yeah.
So we talked about SPF. We can talk a little bit about DKIM, I guess, just to kind of level set on how that works really quick. DKIM is basically just email signature verification, right? We stick a text key out in your DNS environment, and that just allows you to validate that a message is legitimate. And so it's a very PKI-ish type thing. And then the combination of those working in conjunction with DMARC is the most, complete implementation that you can have with regards to what you have control over just from a DNS text record implementation. And then, there are policies in DMARC on how to handle them. And really it's more just around verification, alerting, things like that, so that the receiving party knows what to do.
Yep.
But that all, again, relies on whatever tooling the third party has to go through the validation process and handle it appropriately, which doesn't always happen.
Yep.
So, but that's not what we're here to talk about, right? So what we're here to talk about is the issue going on specifically with Proofpoint. We're going to talk a little bit also about Microsoft having some issues too internally with regards to handling of email, and I was having this conversation with a client who actually was affected by this specific issue, and one of the takeaways from it was that in again looking backwards, we had on-prem Exchange, we had inline email filtering. And what I mean by that is before those emails, there was no back channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before those emails were able to land in your email, they had to go through an appliance, and so we don't have all this on-prem stuff anymore. Everything's been pushed up to the cloud, and there's a lot of functionality and ways that these things work that maybe we don't understand, and definitely that we don't have control over. And I think that kind of speaks to what we're going to talk about with specific to the Proofpoint issue.
Yeah.
And
yes,
you can't even do inline anymore, right? Everything has to be out of band.
Yep.
So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, so Guardio was the company that put out some research in an article. This looks like 3 days ago, as of today, of the time we're recording it, which is August 1st. So they called it echo spoofing. And they called it a massive phishing campaign that exploited Proofpoint's email protection to dispatch millions of perfectly spoofed emails. So essentially, they kind of discovered this in the wild exploitation of email spoofing against big organizations. It says that Proofpoint's responsible for securing 87 of the Fortune 100 companies. So these are like the Disney, IBM, Nike's, Coca-Cola, etc. And the interesting kind of piece to this is that the SPF and DKIM signatures were all valid. It bypassed a lot of the major security protections that Proofpoint and Microsoft had in place to protect against this exact type of email attack. So, so Proofpoint, Guardio put out this research, and we're going to kind of talk through kind of how this happened, what the kind of the misconfiguration was, and that conversation about SPF and DKIM is important because, like I said, the threat actors were able to kind of bypass those protections and send emails that were spoofed but had valid SPF and DKIM signatures.
Right. Which is obviously red flag, right? So you should not be able to do that based on the current understanding of these mechanisms and how they work. And if all the moving parts are operating properly, that would be impossible. And so I think even in the article, they're like, did they compromise the key? Like what happened? How is this even possible?
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely kind of it's a surprise.
Yeah. So kind of the core of the issue here, as we understand it, is Proofpoint's relay servers and the way in which they're configured. So when you are a Proofpoint customer and you sign up and you point your email, which is likely Microsoft 365, or if you have Gmail or whatever, you're going to point your email to this Proofpoint smart host. This smart host takes in emails and sends the emails out, and it's that filter, right? It's where all the protection is for those email security threats and spoofing and content and all that stuff. So that smart host does kind of the heavy lifting.
Right.
So you have your Microsoft 365 account, let's say, and then you point it at Proofpoint, and in Proofpoint you configure, that, hey, you want to allow Microsoft emails. And essentially that's where the issue is that Proofpoint was trusting all of Microsoft, essentially. It was trusting everything on Microsoft's infrastructure or domains, right? So a threat actor, the threat actors in this case, what they discovered was threat actors were able to set up a business Microsoft 365 account. They were able to do some magic on the back end. They set up some stuff, which we can talk about. They were able to use a malicious SMTP server that they owned and controlled. They changed the from address to be like from Disney or from Nike or whatever. And they sent that through Microsoft to this Proofpoint relay for like Nike or Disney or whoever the target was, or whoever the victim was, and then sent it through that smart host. And that smart host, because it trusted Microsoft blindly, the SPF signatures were valid, the DKIM, everything was valid. It looked like it was from Disney or from Nike. and it just allowed it right on through. And it gets to the victim, and the victim has no idea that it's actually not from Disney or Nike or IBM or whatever. And that's where kind of the issue is this PP hosted this smart host from Proofpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to a client in their inbox, for those of you that use Gmail or other free email solutions, they have mechanisms put in place to kind of highlight inconsistencies. So like if it's a Gmail account and it's saying that it's not a Gmail account, like it's pretty obvious. You can look at the actual like from address and, no, you really didn't win the lottery. Right. But in these cases, it was branded for the company that it was being spoofed from. And, it was by every measurable way that you can tell a legitimate email from the company. And so I'm sure there were a substantial amount of victims because of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it seems like, and just based on this research and other research I did with related email phishing and spoofing techniques, with related techniques like direct send, which is another kind of side discussion with email phishing and spoofing and stuff. But Microsoft, because the threat actor created a Microsoft 365 account, it more or less trusted it more so than it would just the malicious SMTP server. So right. Because it came from Microsoft, it was already kind of inherently trusted in some ways. And because it's that Proofpoint smart host was being used as a relay, normally Microsoft would block that, but because it was that smart host was used as a relay, it kind of let the spoofed emails through. So there's a bit of a misconfiguration there, and that Proofpoint allowed the whole Microsoft ecosystem to be trusted, and then Microsoft kind of trusts their own, right? So if you send an email from Microsoft to Microsoft, we noticed that it doesn't protect as much as it would from coming externally into the Microsoft ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And, what makes it even more interesting is if you're sending Microsoft internally, right? So from one Exchange Online instance to another, it doesn't check the MX records. So what that means is that it gets routed. And if you have, like, for example, Proofpoint that you're using for a out-of-band email filtering gateway, that will effectively bypass the gateway. And so really the only thing standing between you and the other Exchange instance is I think it's called EOP, Exchange Online Protection. Mm-hmm. Is it protection?
Yep.
Yeah, Exchange Online Protection, which again is pretty lax by comparison. So, there are ways to back channel that, like you described.
Yep. Yeah, and the Guardio article also talks about how Microsoft normally, like if you use someone else's domain in your emails from field, you need to validate that in your Office 365 account. But because the threat actors use this front end transport to relay the emails, they actually don't need to validate that, and then Microsoft just, I guess, doesn't care to check that spoofed from field. Right. So that in part is kind of the misconfiguration on Microsoft's end to kind of allow that behavior to happen.
Right. Yeah. So multiple kind of trust relationships being exploited here in order for this to be successful. So what are Proofpoint what is Proofpoint doing about it? What is Microsoft doing about it? What should we do about it? I mean, are there any other moving parts we should talk about before we get into like mitigation and stuff like strategy?
I think that's mostly it. So the spoofed headers was achieved through using a malicious SMTP server, right?
Right.
The Microsoft 365 business account was used to actually send the email. The SPF was achieved by relaying using the Exchange transport. So that's an Exchange thing.
Yeah, it's a configuration. What do they call it? Trying to remember. There's a connector.
Yeah.
The connector is a technical name for it. Yep.
So the SPF was good with that. The DKIM was a result of the Proofpoint configuration that allowed just all of my Office 365.
Yep.
So you've got all these pieces together, and then essentially you point the email to the Proofpoint relay, for the the big Fortune 100 company that you're targeting or Fortune 15 company that you're targeting. You use something like so threat actors use SparkPost, which is like a big email service provider that will like send out massive amounts of emails for you. Yeah. And then from Proofpoint, so the email gets delivered to Proofpoint servers. Okay. It's accepted by the Proofpoint smart host, and then it is echoed back and dispatched as a fully genuine email, including all the SPF records, the DKIM. It's signed and it's totally good, according to this Guardio article. And then it's delivered in the victim's inbox as a coupon, or your account has expired, or whatever the the campaign is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and so there's really not. You're basically even going through commercial filtering. So like if this were to go through Mimecast, for example, it's been validated. There's no reason for Mimecast to worry about it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there are other protections that should be in place here. So for example, sandboxing and exploding of URLs should be in place for larger organizations. It's an expensive service, but yeah, that's another thing that would help with this in regards to it. Now, usually that's an after the fact thing though, right? That's not a real time check. So even if it does get sandboxed off and investigated, then you have to hope that you have the ability to pull those back out of the inbox.
Yep.
So, but that's really the only in place protection that existed prior to this that I'm aware of.
Yep. So Proofpoint implemented this X originator org header that Guardio had tested and had worked with Proofpoint on, and supposedly, they found that it was sufficient mitigation for this. So they have this X originator org header, which helps to identify the originator. They've also implemented additional controls in like their admin configuration screen to specify which Office tenant can essentially relay emails, right?
Yeah.
So instead of all of Office 365 or Microsoft 365, you add your customer tenant. So it's like, customer.onmicrosoft.com.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that, well, I was just going to say, I mean, that to me is the most logical solution to this, right? Is we're not going to blanket trust an entire technology. We're going to make sure it's coming from the domain that it purports to be coming from.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that should nuke this from orbit, hopefully.
Yep. Yeah. And then those things, like you said, combined with Exchange Online protection, which does check for spoofing. It checks content. It'll check for malware and attachments and stuff. But also Defender for Microsoft 365 is available as well. That's, a pay to play thing. That's above and beyond what you get with Exchange. EOP comes built into all Microsoft 365 accounts. Mm-hmm. Or Defender for Microsoft 365 kind of takes it up a notch. That's where I believe the safe links are, or I think they call them safe links, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The sandboxing and some of the more enhanced email security features come into play there.
Sure. And, kind of quick side mention too, we had talked a little bit about, the issue with being able to send direct mail between, mm-hmm. Exchange Online tenants. There are mechanisms to solve that too, right? And so the issue there is that it bypasses your third-party filtering gateway. But you can set up a route rule, right? So you can actually go in and create a custom rule in your M365 environment to effectively force all mail to be routed back mm-hmm. through your third-party gateway to solve that. So two different problems, two different solutions. Hopefully we delineated the two enough, even though we were talking about both at the same time.
Yep.
So,
yeah. So lastly, as the article indicates from Guardio, they wanted to extend a kudos to Proofpoint. Proofpoint had, I guess, identified this prior to Guardio mentioning it to them, it seems like, and they were kind of already kind of looking at it. But, it's nice to see them allowing, research like this and articles to be released. It seems like they did respond to this in a timely manner and worked with Guardio to implement a fix and kind of test it. So good on them. in doing that. And I think as a whole, it's going to help other organizations and other vendors, look at the same kind of thing and make sure that they're tight on those configurations as well.
Yeah, agreed. Good job to Proofpoint. I have a long history of implementing and working with Proofpoint. I've always had good things to say about them. I know not everybody feels the same way, but I've had reasonably good luck. And in by and large, they tend to be at the front edge of email security. So
Yep.
so good for them for responding to this the way they did.
Yep. One last thing that I think is interesting is so the threat actors are sending like 3 million emails a day. And then towards the end of the campaign, they kind of realized that this exploit or this misconfiguration was being patched, and they shot up to like, I don't know, like 14 million emails or something like that in a day. So they kind of like they realized that it was close to the end, and they just started spraying as much as they could to get as much juice out of the squeeze as they could. And that was, I guess, early June of this year is when that kind of like peaked off.
Wow. Yeah, and I think they were sending what did you say, 3 mil a day,
I think the article said about 3 million emails a day. Yeah, 3 million.
I mean, yeah, way to stay under the radar, guys. Like,
right?
come on, man. So and it always kind of makes me giggle because I just imagine that it's a 13-year-old kid or something who has no self-control or no ability to like, hey, maybe if we don't want to get caught, which I'm thankful for, right? I'm glad they make stupid decisions. It makes our job easier. But yeah, 3 million a day. Come on, man.
Yeah, 3 million a day, and not many people noticed. I mean,
yeah, that's wild.
That's a lot of emails, but just goes to show like just how much emails there are in the ecosystem. That's probably a drop of the bucket in the total amount of emails being transferred at any given day.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. No doubt. All right, folks, that's all we have time for today. If you enjoyed the show, just like, subscribe, most importantly, share it with your friends and just tell everybody about what we're doing.